Am I saying it right? Almeida, Samoa, and Catania, I don't always say it.
Live and running.
Oh, Butcher. How are you?
And Corinne.
Corinne, how are you?
Yeah, should do. Okay, you guys can all hear me? Okay. Right, we're away. Good afternoon, everyone. A very warm welcome to our house to share thoughts and memories of Hazel Joy Russ's 95 years, and to hear either spoken or pre-recorded tributes about how this wonderful lady has enriched all our lives and given us all something to strive for. Thanks firstly for the slide presentation we have been watching, is compiled by Amanda Burrows with background music played by Carol. These are all hymns Carol used to play to Joy in the different places she has lived in over the later years, and recently via Zoom calls to the CHT rest home, which Mum really enjoyed. So to all of you here joining us, welcome. And via the wonders of technology, welcome to the Canucks, Carol, Jim, Natalie, Scott, Tennille, Kiefer and Harrison. It's a mild 28 degrees here, positive that is. Also welcome to our Aussies, Nick, Kareen. All of you I know would love to have been here in person. And the other relatives who are streaming this live, I hope you can all hear everything and feel that you are part of this celebration of Joy's life. This type of gathering has become the norm now, and it was decided by Harold, Beryl and Carol the best way to honour their mum. Okay, the format of today's celebration of Joy will be in the form of a number of speakers here live using the mic provided, and some pre-recorded tributes and items that will be shown on the screen, and some live streamed tributes with some of Joy's favourite hymns interspersed. So I will start proceedings today with a few words about my favourite mother-in-law. Hi, I'm Robin, Joy's number 2 son-in-law, falling well behind Jim over there in Canada. I've had the pleasure of knowing Joy, Mum, or old Granny Snyder, for about 45 years when I first started dating her eldest daughter. It wasn't just the lovely hot roast lunches that attracted me to this family, but that helped. Yes, we would all eat Sunday lunch together. Then we would sit around and discuss important events. Included in the discussion would be the exact date, the time of day, the weather conditions, the exact first name, middle, last of everyone involved. And by the time that all was resolved, I'd forgotten what the original topic was about. Joy was always very friendly and welcoming. I never heard a harsh word said about anyone. Well, that was until the day her doctor advised her driving her car was not an option. She was not happy, to say the least. Joy always took great delight in telling us about the AA instructor who earlier had told her she was a very good driver and carried his letter in her purse for many years. Chris and others here, however, could confirm that her lead foot made her quite the granny racer, and how she managed the Blockhouse Bay roundabout for all those years, we will never know. Joy always took a great interest in anything our children were involved in, remembering upcoming events with a ring to wish them well and congratulate them afterwards. Another interesting fact that I always remembered was her Christmas card register. Pages and pages of contacts, and there was lists down. A tick would be show when the card was sent to each person, and then the following column had a tick if a card was returned. Now, if somebody was to miss more than 2 returns, they were off the list. She was always aware of spending time or money equally for all her grandkids and was very generous with those things. One of life's sayings goes, always look at your mother-in-law to be. as that is what your wife will be like. I now know that is true, and I know my choice was a good one. So, old Granny Snyder, you have been a great role model for us all to follow. I have really enjoyed being part of your family, all the joking and laughs and confusing you by driving you different directions to familiar places. We appreciate all you have done for our family. Rest in peace, Mum. All right. Okay, our first live stream on Zoom, we are heading to Hawera in Taranaki, is it right? To Joy's nephew, Chester Burrows, who will be speaking on behalf of Harold and sharing his own thoughts with us. Welcome in, Chester.
Hi, Rob. Good to be here. I hope you can hear me okay.
Yep.
Oh, that's good. So I had a meeting with Joy maybe 2.5 years ago when we talked about the service and what she wanted particularly. And if there's anything like our dad, Jim, she changed her mind a number of times. I'm sure she'd be happy with what's been prepared for today. But the thing that she specifically mentioned to me isn't one that's been chosen, and I just wanted to recall that. It's, I love that will not let me go. I love that will not let me go. I rest my weary soul in thee. I give thee back the life I owe, that in thine ocean depths its flow may richer, fuller be. O light that followest all my way, I yield my flickering torch to thee. My heart restores its borrowed ray, that in thy sunshine's blaze its day may brighter, fairer be. O joy, how appropriate. O joy that seekest me through pain. I cannot close my heart to thee. I trace the rainbow through the rain, and feel the promise is not vain, that morn shall tearless be. O cross that liftest up my head, I dare not ask to fly from thee. I lay in dust's life's glory dead, and from the ground there blossoms red, life that shall endless be. My impressions of Auntie Joy are that she was a person who was endlessly positive, interested and engaged in all that she was doing, but in all that was going on around her and going on in the lives of those she was engaged with. And reading her memoirs over the last few days, she had the smallest details at her fingertips, and her memories were always centred on fun events and the good nature of people, unless there was an injustice involved. Then the injustice was exposed and the culprit either held to account or it was noted for later reference. The teacher who wouldn't believe the 8-year-old could sew and produce a dress, the assumption that graffiti written in blue chalk would have been Joy's blue chalk, when they were not even the same blue. The surgeon who felt he had the right ex officio to be the devil to work with. Her father being born in 1868 and her mother in 1882, meaning Auntie Joy turned up when her mother was 44 and her dad 62, sets the scene. They were different generations. Her dad was the same age as our great-grandfather Hammond. No wonder that expectations from life, behaviour, subservience, decorum, etc. were nothing suited to the world in which Joy grew up. So in that age, when views were narrow and conservative, it's remarkable that this woman developed was liberal, aware, resilient and self-reliant. These things seem to have sprung from her mother, who seemed to take no crap and got on and did. Shifted when there needed to be changed, worked hard and seemed to never hold back when opportunities arose and needs must. There seems too, throughout the story of Joy's life, that although the estrangement after several bouts of family violence separated, of their father. And the family group of her mum, brother Harold and herself, an incredible strength of love, loyalty and respect. The friendship between all three, Harold being the dutiful big brother even though he was only 2 years older than Joy, the protectiveness and the caring is very cool. Her mum's gratitude for Joy seeing a job and doing it without being told, weeding garden paths for a mum who with only one arm and tending the garden, as well as all the other chores and paid work raising 2 kids on her own, etc. And when she saw the weeded path, brought Joy a watch for being so considerate when she was about 8 or 10. Joy, having left school at the end of Form 2 or Year 8 in modern speak, set about continuing education and career building, from office administration to PA to nursing and then promotions through that career pathway. As a nephew on various visits, and then when I was living in Auckland, Auntie Joy was always wanting to know my thoughts and plans and would give us experiences we'd never had in Nelson. Deb and I decided we'd save up and travel by plane and bus to Wellsford. I was 12, so Deb was about 15. We stayed a couple of nights in Onehunga and were taken to town and saw the sights, the museum, Queen Street, farmers. I made my first clothing purchase, being a white belt and a paisley tie. Auntie Joy was more excited than I was, I think. Harold taught me how to tie the knot in the modern way without slipping it through the last loop so it hung straight and flat on the collar. This was very 1971. This was just like Steve Grant and Pete Sinclair and all the other cool guys. I showed my cousin Alvin Borrows, and I think he still wears his tie that way. Auntie Joy was also the one of that generation who never seemed to have a cautionary note in her tone or advice. Mum's family, so Mum Rogers and the rest of the family, were always full of advice about why something wasn't a good idea or shouldn't be done, and what would people think, especially Granddad Russ. Yet Joy was always, and what do you do then? Or how do you do this or that? Harold told me the story of him putting a sail on his trolley and then putting Beryl in it as it took off down the street. Uncle Roger was worried out about the mess on the intersection at the bottom of the hill. Auntie Joy had given him the sheet for the sail. The house never seemed to be quiet or empty. I remember youth groups and people staying, but never the impression that it was too much of an inconvenience. Whereas many would be guarded in the privacy of their own space, Roger and Joy seemed to set about ministry at a gallop. The record of growth in congregations, Sunday schools and community work is incredible. 180 children in the Sunday school in Whangarei when they'd started with 25 on arrival. Similar growth in Wanganui, which is legendary. And in my years working in Wanganui, people made connections with the Russes at Wanganui Church of Christ through the church, Boys Brigade Sunday School in the community, and that was 40 years after their ministry there. Roger and George stacked up as people of faith. And Deb and I have Roger and Joy to thank for bringing our mum and dad together, as our mum was visiting and staying with Roger and Joy for 3 months between seasons, and Dad was a member of their congregation the rest of history. The scripture Joy had chosen for her funeral service was from John 14 and is often used at funeral services. It's the scripture that starts, let not your hearts be troubled. And Jesus uses the analogy of the Jewish wedding tradition, which has a number of applications, such as nobody knowing the day or the hour of Christ's return, and there are places prepared ahead of time. The tradition of being that the tradition was of being that when a couple was betrothed, the groom went off to build a room on the side of his father's house. And when it was done, he returned and there was a wedding and the couple went off to live. The bride forever with her in-laws. taking wedding services, I often make a joke about this. In my case, I'm glad it wouldn't have been the other way around. I think even Vanessa agrees. But it has another poignancy in relation to joy. I was mentioning to Harold how grateful we should be for those who came along and diluted the gene pool, well, mostly. This isn't a slur on the Russ ancestry line, as there's plenty to be proud of there, but people like Joy and our dad, Jim and Ailsa and others, made our parents get over themselves a bit. They encouraged them to be their own people and in some cases prevented too much pressure to conform being exerted on us, their kids. They were free-spirited people and encouraged us to have our own dreams, thoughts and ideas, even when it was bleeding obvious we may well fall flat on our face. When I spoke with Joy about her service, it was obviously always going to be a celebration. Pretty much had enough, and she was ready for the next adventure, and one she'd been planning for decades to come. We can only be glad that she's now in a place where she can, as the hymn says, rest her weary soul. I think the opportunity to say a few words there in reflection and on behalf of Harold and the conversations that we've had over the last few days, I hope are reflected there, Harold, as to the person that Joy was, and so aptly named, because I don't think I ever saw at a time when she wasn't joyful. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Chester. The first of the hymns that we will listen to today, or sing along if you feel keen, was also used in Roger's funeral, and that is Thine Be the Glory. So Joining us now, we have 4 very brave great-grandchildren to share some thoughts about their granny. First up live, we have Caleb Burrows. Then following Caleb is Emma Burrows. And then we have 2 video clips. Firstly, Kiefer Neufeld and Tennille Neufeld. Okay. How does this work? Take it off.
Hello. Hello. Boochuck, can you hear? Yep. Yep, they can? Okay. Granny Snyder was a lovely lady. She was always in a good mood and always willing to do whatever we wanted. Personally, I was keen to see the Powley swimming pool, so she would willingly take me and my sister to walk to see it. Along the way, we would stop off at the mailboxes. I would search for her one and grab out any mail she had received. That was one of the things we did on our walk. Another thing she would do is intentionally walk through the games room where all the old ducks are playing cards and talk to some of them about us. Kind of showing off that she had such wonderful grandkids. When we left the games room, this would take a while, there are so many wonderful things to say, we would then go into the pool room and see what was new, because it was always under construction. I never remember anything about the pool itself. I only remember the tropical birds and flowers on the walls and roof. Then we would toddle our way back to Gran's room. When we were back in her room, she would offer us a glass of tea and free rein to her biscuit tins. She would always have tins, never packets. Even if she brought them in packets, she would put them into a tin. To finish it off, we would have a lolly from Gran's lolly jar. I loved playing with stuff from Granny's room. It is all so different. The phone book, for example. Like, how can you have the phone number of every single person in the whole building? Her envelope knife was cool. It was super sharp. She would let me open up her mail we had collected earlier. After we had done that, I would go over to her keyboard and make an absolute racket. If we went to Granny's with Granddad, he would get sick of it straight away. I mean, who wouldn't want that to stop? The answer is Granny. She would let me play with it as long as I wanted. But eventually, even I would get sick of it. I would go over to the original recliner and pull the lever up and down to flick out the footrest. I remember Caitlin and I would play with this. Caitlin would sit on the leg rest part, and I'd quickly pull the lever and she'd go crashing down to the floor. A couple years later, she got a new recliner, Chair 2.0. This one was awesome. All you had to do was hold some buttons and whoosh up you went. This wasn't the case for Granny. When we were over, we would push the buttons and the chair would practically push her out. I know, what bad grandkids. I remember when I was fiddling around in the bathroom and playing with her shower seat. Because I was young and silly, I saw a button that says push in case of emergency. And yes, you know where this is going. I walked right over and pushed that bright red button. It didn't make a sound, so I just left it there. But to my surprise, one nurse came jogging into Gran's room and just saw her sitting on the couch, not in any trouble. So she went back to the bathroom and saw me sitting on the shower seat. She went back to Mum and told Mum and Gran what happened. Mum was a bit mad. Whenever I hear Mum saying goodbye to Granny, I roll under the bed, hoping she'll just leave me to stay with Granny. But she finds me every time. I wonder why. As the years went on, Granny was becoming less able to do her normal things, like go on walks around Powley with us or go to Hahe and even drive. She has lived in a few different places over the past 10 years, and our family has good memories there. We all miss her dearly. We know that she is still the same loving, amazing, and caring Granny. We all love and miss you, Granny Snyder.
The thing I remember the most about Granny is her lolly jar. Granny lived in a few different places, but each place there was the lolly jar. I remember one time, me, Caleb, Caitlin and Mum went to visit Granny, but she was asleep in her chair. Me and Caleb stole some lollies from her lolly jar. Without her waking up. The lollies she always had were little licorice blobs with sprinkles on them. I loved them. The last time I saw Granny, Mum wanted to take a photo, Granny had a little bib on. She said, "I don't need that in the photo," and it was cute. She then fluffed up her hair, ready for the photo. I love you so much, Granny. I will miss you. From Emma.
I'm Kifo, and she was nice, but I know she was old. And the moment I knew she passed away, I almost burst into tears.
I'm Tennille, and I'm reading a poem that Granny loved. Daffodils by William Wordsworth. I wandered lonely as a cloud that floats on high o'er vales and hills, when all at once I saw a crowd, a host of golden daffodils, beside the lake, beneath the trees, fluttering and dancing in the breeze, continuous as the stars that shine and twinkle on the Milky Way. They stretched in ever-ending line along the margin of a bay. 10,000 saw I at a glance, tossing their heads in sprightly dance. The waves beside them danced, but they outdid the sparkling waves in glee. A poet could not but be gay in such a jocund company. I gazed and gazed, but little thought what wealth the show to me had brought. For oft, when on my couch I lie, in vacant or in pensive mood, they flash upon that inward eye, which is the bliss of solitude, and then my heart with pleasure fills, and dances with the daffodils.
You were all great grandchildren. Tennille's poem on daffodils relates to the Cornwall Park daffodil trail that Joy used to take Roger, push him around there, and then later we used to take Joy there as well, or probably Harold did as well, but she used to love those daffodils at Cornwall Park, so that's the reason for that poem. So thanks again, all you great grandchildren. Next are two of Joy's grandchildren. Firstly, live with us is David Russ, followed by Chris Hood.
Hi everybody. Today I just wanted to share with you a few of the really lucid memories that I have of spending time with my gran. These are the memories that, although some of them go right back to when I was quite young, I can remember them today just like they were yesterday. Walking around the caves at Red Beach. Gran was quite happy to entertain the notion that I had quite entrenched in my mind that there would certainly be buried treasure that pirates had left around those caves, and although we didn't go digging for it, we did explore the caves. Playing croquet at her place in Matamata when they stayed there with the other grandchildren and our parents. Such fond memories. Making pikelets. Gran taught both me and my sister Mel to make pikelets. She taught us well, and this morning I made some, 35 years later, I don't know how long, being read bedtime stories of Brewer Rabbit and Florence Nightingale. Such fond memories. I will never forget her beautiful smile, and that twinkle in her kind eyes. Love you, Gran. Thank you, everyone.
Good afternoon, everybody. I really appreciate the opportunity to share a few memories of our granny. She was a loving, kind and determined lady who spent most of her life serving others. She worked hard as a team with Grandad to help anyone that they crossed paths with. I appreciate the huge support she's given to me, to my daughter, and will treasure the times we spent together. I've just got a few stories I'd like to share today about our gran. During my teacher training, I had a placement down in Whitianga in the Coromandel, and over one of the weekends, Mum and Dad brought Granny down to visit, and it coincided with the school that I was teaching at having their school gala. So they made their way around the gala and checked out what was going on. There was food stalls and places where you could buy knickknacks, but Granny decided that the activity that she would really like to do was the nail hitting challenge. The aim was to hit a nail into a piece of wood with as few hits as possible. It's perfect for an elderly lady. So up she stepped and she bashed away. She gave it a really good go, and it was awesome. I think it really speaks to her willingness to give things a go, and not necessarily in the way that we would always expect. While Granny was living at Pauli, I was fortunate enough to have lunches with her during my school holiday breaks. She would book me in a spot at her table, and we would toddle on down to the dining room for whatever the kitchen staff had prepared for that day. I really treasure those moments. She seemed to enjoy introducing me to the other residents as her little grandson, and I don't quite get why they found it funny, but they were really special times. Granny, as Dad said, Granny really enjoyed her driving and the independence that came with it. I was fortunate or unfortunate enough to be one of the last passengers that she took for a ride in her car. She was still determined to drive and had made her way up here for a family get-together. And before she went home, it was decided that I should go in the passenger seat just to make sure she was doing okay. And I think Granny took this as a bit of a challenge. She thought, I'll show them, I can drive, I'm fine. So off we went, and I think I had the quickest trip I've ever had from New Windsor to Blockhouse Bay, ever. There was definitely some hairy moments, and I think after Granny had been driven around by Grandad for quite a number of years, who was definitely very cautious and would indicate when he pulled out of a driveway, Granny definitely had her own style and speed while driving. I'm really grateful that Granny got to meet my little girl and spend lots of time with her. I'll really treasure those moments. Seeing my girl as a toddler walking around in her lounge at Pauli and playing bubbles out on the lawn. She'd go into the cupboard and pull out the books that Granny would have set aside for visits, and she'd have a bit of a read. I think it's really special to have shared moments with a great-grandparent. Oh, this is a bad idea. So to finish today, I'm going to try and sing a song for you guys. So to represent both my daughter Eden and me, I'll do a little bit in Samoan, a little bit in English. Ooh. So this is the version of I Love You, Lord. So it goes. O te alofa, ia te oilo ali'i, o te tuina atu nei, lo leo mo oe, le whaaola, lo u ole le sanga, ia te oi le tupu, ia veao ma pese malie, I o fofonga. I love you, Lord, and I lift my voice to worship you. Oh, my soul, rejoice. Take joy, my King, in what you hear. Let it be a sweet, sweet sound in your ear. Love you, Granny.
Thank you, David and Chris. You are both pretty great also. Now Joy's lovely daughter and my lovely wife, Beryl, will now hopefully be up to sharing with us.
It's always good to follow Chris singing. I do want to just, before I share my own thoughts, just, I didn't bring the glasses, but I did, but it's just the tears, I think, not the glasses. To acknowledge comments made by my cousins and Anne and Marion this week. Our mums, Auntie Mary and Mum, had a very strong friendship well before the Russ boys came on the scene, nursing together in Gisborne right until the end. So this is Mum and Mary in their early days. As dementia progressed for them both, a sure way to revive the twinkle in their eye and maybe a story or two was to mention the other. So thanks to Anne and Marion for your messages over this past week, and to all my other cousins who I also have had lovely messages and chats with, and I'm glad a lot of you can listen in, and sorry you can't be here. 95, who would have imagined? Leaning out the bedroom window, gasping for air as another severe asthma attack took a grip on her. Taking to her bed in a darkened room, basin at her side, waiting for the vomiting to pass and then sleep take over as another migraine hit. Mum didn't keep the best of health, and yet looking back with adult eyes, this did not stop a very hard-working, compassionate woman from just getting on with it. Saturdays, big wash day with her agitator ringer washing machine, housework, baking to fill the tins. Many a Saturday night I would return home to great smells in the kitchen and hopefully something to sample, many of which you're going to be able to sample later. Then Sunday's the day of rest. Up early to prepare the roast, heading home between Sunday school and church to put on veggies, and then visitors to share that roast dinner. If there were no visitors at church that day, the members of the congregation would be invited to join us. Back to church in the evening, and then the youth group back to enjoy that baking. I remember crawling to the end of my bed in Ingester Street, trying to peer into the lounge across the hall. Mum's horror as one of the youth group dropped something on the carpet in our new house in Wanganui and then proceeded to grind it in with his foot. But it wasn't you, Brian. And then the overnight visitors that frequented our home, regulars coming up to Auckland for meetings, heaps of Americans in New Zealand for the World Church of Christ Conference. Endless people could always be guaranteed a bed at our place. We might have to forfeit ours, but that was just how it was. I look back now and think, how did she do it? And always so graciously. And then she became a grandmother and a great-grandmother. Great indeed. How she delighted in these next generations. When Rob built Mum and Dad's retirement home, a little cupboard was built, accessible from the dining room for toys for the children. And she took some of them with her to Powley, Royal Oak and St John's. When the children visited, she chatted with them, played with them, and made them the centre of attention during their visits. As time progressed, it was interesting to observe the grandmother become the child and the child the grandmother. We have a video of Eden at about 2 with the colours book that she got off the shelf, asking, "What colour is this, Granny?" "Good." I've just touched on 2 aspects of Mum's life, both of which reflect the life of a special mum who served her Lord by serving all those around her in a non-judgmental, loving, compassionate way. Your rest is well deserved. Love you, Mum.
Very good, well done, boss. We switch now to 3 video clips from Saskatoon in Canada. A warm welcome to you all. First up is grandson-in-law Scott Neufeld, followed by number 1 son-in-law Jim Smith, and then lastly by Joy's other lovely daughter Carol, who will then finish up by introducing our next hymn, The King of Love My Shepherd Is. So welcome in, Scott.
As I sit here and recall some of my fondest memories of Granny, I can't help but picture her strutting out the patio door of her little apartment at Powley, where I met her for the first time. She was 83 and she moved like she was 38. That was 12 years ago. Now you might be thinking 12 years. That's not very long to have known this pleasant, caring matriarch who loved her family and friends with her whole self. Well, actually, 12 years is basically 1/8 of Granny's life. And if you think of her life like a pie cut into 8 pieces, where the first 7 pieces seem to be gone in no time, I feel quite privileged to have been part of the last piece. You know, the one you savor for as long as possible and enjoy it while you can. Which reminds me of my fondest memory of Granny. I can recall on numerous occasions the whole family would be gathered at Beryl and Rob's. It was sometimes uncomfortably loud with conversation and children playing. Granny would be sitting in the chair by the stove, tea in one hand, a slice of dessert or pie in the other, just soaking in the love and joy of the family she created. Until all of a sudden, out of the blue, she would say, "Rob, I'm ready to go. Take me home." Granny, those family gatherings will not be the same now, and you will be forever missed. But there is joy in knowing joy is home.
I'd like to talk a little on Joy, the mother-in-law. Now, as the favourite son-in-law and held in very high esteem, although about 6 inches lower than the first favourite son-in-law, I'd like to just recognise how it was for me. She made me completely welcome right from the beginning and accepted all the way through. Joy loved her family and wanted to know what everyone was doing, share what was happening. And she particularly loved her daughters and was so thankful. Rob, at least this is what she told me, that the husbands that the daughters had were all that she could ask. And she would say to me, "You take care of her." I'm not really sure whether that meant that she was affirming that I do take care of her, or she was assuring me that I should take care of her. Anyway, it is not a challenge to take care of Carol, because Joy is her mum. Joy wasn't superhuman, but maybe she was super humble. She had her opinions, but when I expressed mine, she did not debate them. I think she knew that I would come around eventually. She didn't tell me what to do, although I knew that I should. Really, Joy was a friend. but she was also my mum.
Mum completed her registered nurse training at Cook Hospital in Gisborne in 1949, having previously worked as a typist. Nearly 30 years later, we both worked at Green Lane Hospital, and for a short time, we even worked together in Ward 14. So I saw firsthand what high regard she was held in by surgeons, nursing colleagues, patients, and their families. She mentioned how she felt very humble when a patient told her she was glad Mum was on duty, because Mum always handled her gently. But she had a moment early in her career that potentially could have ended it before it started. In 1949, before women's liberation was a movement, Mum worked in the orthopaedic operating room. I'm not sure what prompted it, but having scrubbed in and being mid-operation, she downed instruments and walked out. She felt sure then that her nursing days would be over, but waited for Mr. Park to come out of the operating room to apologise. Mr. Park simply said, "That's all right, Nurse Perrier. I know I'm a devil to work with." Her sense of right and wrong was not to be messed with. She went on to enjoy nursing in Birmingham, accident emergency room, at Green Lane, and in family practice in Matamata. Mum has lived a full life in the 18 years since Dad died, including taking the Gold Leaf Rail service through the Canadian Rockies with Cliff to come and stay with us in Saskatoon. Teetotal all her life, Cliff told her, "Joy, just say yes please to the champagne. I'll drink yours." When they checked into their Kamloops hotel room, it had just one king-size bed. So she promptly called the front desk for another room, clarifying that, yes, we might be Mr. and Mrs. Russ, but no, we're not married. Joy Bells likely drove longer than she should have, but it was so she could drive old people to their appointments and to choose the perfect cards to mail to others. She was adamant in her denial of ever pulling a U-turn in front of me as I drove up the Richardson Road hill. Joy was a steadfast prayer warrior, daily interceding for so many that she kept lists to be sure she didn't miss anyone. Music held a special place for Mum, though she couldn't hold a tune to save herself. She liked to hear all of us play. It was Mum who suggested that I play in the Auckland competitions. Sometimes she'd say, "You have to blow your own trumpet." Over the last 15 years, playing for her at Powley and more recently virtually from Saskatoon was a thing for Mum and me. Mum's own repertoire consisted of a few bars of All Through the Night. Her preference was to hear songs and hymns that expressed her faith and the joy and the hope that she had in Christ alone. Mum chose the Lord's Prayer to be sung at Gran Perrier's funeral. But when Deb and Mike chose The King of Love My Shepherd Is for their wedding, she told Dad as we drove to their reception she'd never have sung Perverse and Foolish Oft I Stray at her wedding. She loved that hymn nonetheless. Mum especially loved the version sung by the Roston Junior College Chorale of 2007, which includes both Natalie and Scott. I reckon she had her CD player stuck on loop on that track, because so many times when I'd call her, she'd say, "Oh, it's you. Crank the volume up and ask if I could hear what she was listening to." Despite all that Mum endured over the last 2.5 years, I know that she believed His goodness faileth never, and that now she's singing His praise in His house forever. Pitch perfect at last. I hope you enjoyed the Roston Junior College Chorale as much as Mum did. See you later, Mum.
Thank you, Canadians, for all your kind words. We know how hard it has been for you all over there, coping with this from distant shores, but I hope how this celebration has been done that you can all feel part of this. Next up, we have an old family friend, Brian Lang. The Langs and Russ's families grew up together in Wanganui and then moved about the same time up here to Auckland. So welcome, Brian.
Kia ora koutou, talo falava. Greetings everybody to the family here. Thanks for the invitation to be here and to share some thoughts and appreciation of the life of Joy, who we love so dearly. an old friend. Yeah, that's an apt description these days, because my thoughts today come from a period of the 1960s in Wanganui, where Joy and Roger Russ came to the Wanganui Church of Christ, following in the ministry for the Templeton family. Joy and Roger had a partnership ministry. It wasn't just the preacher behind the pulpit. Joy and Roger walked the talk. They lived the faith. They demonstrated it on a daily basis. Joy's nursing background always came to the fore. Her knowledge of the sicknesses and ailments and the problems that people would face and various health issues along the way, they could always turn to Joy for some advice. Their ministry revolved around connections with all of the families in the congregations. From Roger's side, visitation was a key. He kept in touch with the families. So often we'd come home, there'd be a card at the door to say Roger Russ had arrived and been in to visit. And I know that he kept Joy involved with all of the family happenings. Joy was faithfully involved in the CWF, Christian Women's Fellowship, and the manse at Wanganui was a real interesting place. It was an open home. And as Beryl shared before, so many members of the congregation would waltz on in there and have invitations at any time to be able to go there. There'd be a cup of tea, a chat, and some advice. The manse was such an open place. There would be times when I might stay over, or we'd be there for a whole day while my mum and dad were doing something else. That friendship evolved and was with so many of the families there. And I can remember being at the manse in Ingester Street one time, and I said to Harold or Beryl, "Oh, is there someone visiting your father?" Because he had his study at the front of the manse. That was Roger's domain. I wouldn't set foot in there unless there was some special reason, you know. But Beryl or Harold said, "No, Dad's just practicing his sermon for Sunday." And if you put your ear to the door, you'd be able to hear a rendition of what was coming up on the Sunday. He took that side very seriously. But if the study at the front was Roger's domain, the dining room, the kitchen, and all other parts of the house, of the manse, were Joy's domain. She was a workaholic and had everything organised down to the footsteps. And you could see all sorts of modern things happening. Back in those days, you didn't have a food process. There was no such thing. But I watched in awe as she had something, I think it was called a muesli or a muesli or something. Like a colander, a sort of a sieve thing, and you could crank a handle and the food that was in the top would all squish through. And there it came, spinach and potatoes and all sorts of things. Comes out the bottom in the form that young children like baby Carol would be able to eat and have some good nutrition and plenty of vitamins. An interesting place to be. But talking about manses and houses, there's something happened in Wanganui that was testament to the love and respect that the congregation had there for the Russ family and their ministry. And they looked at the Ingester Street manse, which was an old villa and was getting a bit old for purpose. And at a church picnic one time, the some of the men got together and they had the gem of an idea that they were all tradesmen or people of skills. We had painters, decorators, plasterers, builders, drain layers, plumbers, electricians, you name it. They were all there in the congregation. And they said that they'd put their skills together and they could surely build a new manse for the Russ family. And they did over a period of about 12 months or so. That was a project for the church at that time. It was a testament to the ministry. Not all ministers would be able to sort of have that type of support that would come through. Their ministry was singular and very special. On a personal note, I just want to share the special part from Joy, because over a period of years my dad was debilitated with cancer, and it ate away at him literally over a long period of time, years. It was a huge burden for my mum, but the rock of her support, of course, came from her Lord and her belief in Christ Jesus, her friend. But the companionship and compassion and friendship that Joy showed to my mum over those years was beyond expectation, was something we can be forever grateful for. The ministry from the Russ family sort of ended towards the end of the 60s, I think, and they moved up towards Onehunga. I'm sort of getting the nods for the dates here because I know Beryl knows these off backwards. And I know the people in Wanganui were devastated at the time. They said, oh, have we done something wrong? Why are the Russes moving away? But sort of all good things must come to an end, I suppose. But they'd had a singular ministry for about 10 years there and came up to Auckland, and I was fortunate to be able to follow up to Auckland after I'd met my lovely wife Lutta and sort of followed in the footsteps of Lutta, lived in Auckland, so sort of I came up this way and connected again with the congregation in Onehunga for a brief period until married Lutta, and then I sort of flicked over to the Presbyterians. But I think Harold, Beryl, Carol, over the years of that ministry back then, and I'm talking 50, 60 years ago, they really had to share their mum and dad, their sleeping spaces, their beds. They had to share them all with other members of the congregation or people that were visiting through. Thanks for sharing your mum and dad, and especially Joy and her compassion. People talking of the spiritual gifts that people have. I believe that the spiritual gift of Joy's was one of encouragement. It's so positive. She would encourage with knowledge about the person and their needs and what they're facing and their trials, tribulations, joys and celebrations. She would encourage them along pathways there. She was the woman that, from outside my family, that encouraged me to be a teacher. And she did it in a practical way. She reminded me about, you always loved children, colouring in and even how to write her name. And it's those little things that were true based on fact that sort of were really there. Such a pleasure to know Joy and Roger and the Russ family. Kia kaha, kia toa, kia manawa nui.
Thank you, Brian. Right, next up we have Keith and Mary Guyan. They're our next speakers. Now this couple were going to Onehunga Church back in their 20s when the Russes arrived at Onehunga, and they have been close friends ever since that time. So welcome Keith and Mary.
As Rob has just said, I turned up at the Onehunga Church of Christ as a fairly wacky art student, and I realised that this man that I was going out with always was going to church. So I sort of buckled down and went along to church. And I would have to say that the combination you have just heard of Joy and Roger, were something else. And really, they, between the two of them, I would have to say, have had a profound effect on my life. Because in the years that I attended church there, and the influence of both Roger and Joy has been enormous. And I've joined the church the day I married Keith, or the day after, and I'm still very involved. And I owe a lot of that to their sort of support, their love, their training, which they gave to all of the group of young people at our church at the time. You've already heard about the roast dinners. I would have to say that one of the things that I always think of in terms of Joy is her hospitality. I have never met anybody who is so hospitable. Somebody who, would have the roast dinner cooking while she went to church. Obviously, Roger therefore had to trim his sermon and not make it too long, because otherwise we may well have had a rather cooked dinner. She would look around, and anybody who was a visitor would be invited. If there were no visitors, well, then people like us. When we were first married, we lived in a hideous flat that had a stove, which was gas, and it was on or it was off. There was absolutely no way of controlling the temperature. So therefore, when Joy looked in my direction and offered a roast dinner, I was thrilled. I never will forget those roast dinners. Also, when they moved down to Matamata, the congregation missed them so much, and they were so kind with the hospitality that they offered to all of us. We had endless weekends when we would go down and stay and be looked after and talked to, and, as you say, given any advice, and just the sheer warmth, friendship and charm was something else. I'm also grateful for the medical help at times that Joy would give us. Keith was mowing the lawn once. He has never done it again. This was 40 years ago. The lawnmower, and his feet slithered out under him and he landed on his wrist. He thought it was fine. We ate lunch and I said, I'm not sure about this. Should we ring Joy? Joy said, put your hand out in front of you and try and turn it like this, which he did, and he said, I can't. She said, get to the hospital. And she was right. It was broken. I was taking a service once and felt pretty ghastly at the end of it and said to her, I've got this very strange feeling around my ribs and it hurts and it itches and I just feel terrible. And she said, shingles, get yourself to the hospital. And she was right. So in terms of just general advice and all of these things, I mean, she was brilliant, absolutely brilliant. And as for the Christmas cards, yes, every single year, the first Christmas card was always from Joy. Keith wants to read you something which his brother wrote, because the whole family knew the whole family.
Thank you. This is addressed to the Russ family, and it's from Neil, my older brother, and Margaret. We are Neil and Margaret Guyan. I'm Keith's brother, he says. We are writing to offer our warmest condolences to you on the passing of Joy, your mother. I first met Joy when I was about 14 or 15 at a church junior camp, maybe at Queen's Birthday somewhere on the North Shore. Roger and Joy were camp father and mother, and they were brilliant. Their leadership was firm but gentle. As well as being some sort of leader, I was camp pianist. We had a concert, and Joy organised a performance of a popular song, little Mr. Baggy Britches. She somehow had the performers in costume, and she did the choreography and supplied the sheet music. As pianist, I was most impressed. I've never forgotten it. When Roger and Joy were at the Onehunga Church, I was mostly elsewhere, but I always was in touch and aware of the great work that they did and the high esteem in which they were held. Then, in 1976, they stayed with us in Surrey in the United Kingdom, when Roger was attending ecumenical courses at such places as Sally Oak. They were lovely visitors and so kind to our 3 little boys. Joy was the perfect babysitter. Ever since then, we have maintained regular Christmas card contact, and every single time, Joy would reminisce about those happy times, including touring parts of South England. Joy was a kind, loving Christian lady whom it was a great privilege to know. All our love. Neil and Margaret Guy.
Thank you, Keith. As you've heard a long time by now, music was so important to this family, so we now listen to another one of Joy's favourite hymns, Be Still My Soul.
Patience we
Jenny Wallace has been a family contact since about the age of 9. Jenny's parents, Murray and Nessie Sweetman, along with the Guyans, formed the backbone of the Onehunga Church of Christ. And Jenny has also shared attendance at Iona Church in Blockhouse Bay with Joy for quite a while. So welcome, Jenny.
Firstly, I would like to convey my love and sympathy to Harold, Beryl and Carol and their family at the passing of their mother, Joy. We can all understand the breadth and depth of emotion that comes from losing someone so pivotal in our lives. Mothers remain close to their families in thoughts and hearts long after their death. And I hope this will be the case with you. When thinking of my time with Joy, many memories come to mind. And I think for me, the most prominent are times spent with her at church and church activities. Her interest in others was always strong, and her love, kindness and compassion was a shining light. She would seek out people and engage them in conversation, especially young people, and her interest was a great boost to their confidence. My own children often talk about Joy and how she made them feel special. They especially liked the fact that they were growing taller than her. Joy was very loving and didn't shy away from showing that, especially to her own children. She would hug and cuddle them and play with them, always keen to have fun. Joy had a great sense of humour and enjoyed a good laugh, and her laugh was infectious, gathering others up in it all. Joy was a great support to Roger in the work of the church. It would not have been easy raising little children with the comings and goings on of the activities in and out of the manse. She did recall to me in later years how lovely it was at Onehunga for the manse not to be next to the church. I was privileged to connect again with Joy when she began attending Iona Church at Blockhouse Bay. Residing at Powley Village, she was able to enjoy activities with her friends and dine with them or have meals on her own in her unit. She loved having the chapel on site. Throughout her long life, she continued her interest in others. She was a person eager to listen when people needed to share events going on in their lives. She demonstrated acceptance of everyone and delighted in the variety of personalities they expressed. I am grateful for having Joy in my life for 55 years. And I'd like to say, especially to the grandchildren, although you cannot see your gran now, she is alive in you, in your thoughts and in your mind and in your hearts. And she will always be with you because you carry a little piece of her with you always.
Thank you, Jenny. Next up, we have live from Wellington, Debbie Player. This is Chester's sister and a niece of Joy's, who has performed that role very well, with numerous visits to see Joy when in Auckland and share in all the family's goings-on, realising how important family is. So welcome, Debbie. Oops.
Thanks. Poem that Auntie Joy really loved and that we had a connection about. So just a bit of background in the poem, which thanks Carol said to me. Imagine Christmas 1939 and King George VI is having to give his very first Christmas speech. There was a film about it because he had a speech impediment and needed some help. And his 13-year-old daughter, Elizabeth, suggested that he might like to share with the world a poem by Minnie Louise Haskin, and he did share that poem, and it became precious to lots of people. This is the poem. I said to the man who stood at the gate of the year, "Give me a light that I might tread safely into the unknown." And he replied, "Go out into the darkness and put your hand into the hand of God. That shall be to you better than a light and safer than a known way." In New Zealand, there was a 13-year-old girl also whose name was Joy Perrier. And growing up, that poem resonated with her then and throughout her life. And she had an oval-shaped wooden plaque on her wall with that poem. As time went by, my mother, Ethel, also loved that poem, and one Christmas she gave it to me as a cross-stitch because she just loved cross-stitch. And I had it for a long time on my wall. After my mum died in 2017, I was going up to Auckland to see Auntie Joy not long after that, and saw that cross-stitch and spontaneously popped it into my bag. It was about A4 size, and took it to Auckland and said, would she like it, because it was something my mum had done and they were close. And it turned out to be a divine inspiration to take that, because the little wooden plaque that she had, the oval-shaped wooden plaque, had actually become so faded she couldn't read the words, and the poem was still so important to her. So we swapped it out, and she had that cross-stitched for the rest of her time there and throughout the various places she went before she died. And in fact, Harold read it to her at the very end of her life. And I think, thinking about that poem, I think that it very much summed up the faith of her and our parents. And for us and my cousins all around the country, we are also thinking about the fact that this is the end of a generation, the last of those wonderful 10 adults who made up so much of our lives, our parents and our aunts and uncles. And I think about one of the things that connected them was their faith that's so well summed up in that poem about the simply putting your hand into the hand of God. I think that it helped to create calm, steady, can-do people who were optimistic. And I really agree with Chester that the people who joined those 5 Russ children really added so much to the gene pool and to our lives. And I like to think that for us, through the generations, some of us have strong faith, and some of us have found that our faith has perhaps not as strong as those adults were. But no matter what, we can think about the faith that they had, and we can put our hands into their hands and continue to share the calmness, steadiness, optimism, and can-do that they passed on to us. And as all of the stories we've heard about Auntie Joy, and we are a very lucky whānau. Thank you.
Thank you, Debbie. We'll just quickly switch back to Chester now, who will read a message that's been sent from Nicola down Christchurch.
And I can see she's watching, so I better get it right. I had a call from Harold just at lunchtime, so we integrated into the service. And these are Nichola's reflections around Auntie Joy. For me, the invitation of her soft hand reaching for me whenever I saw her was a conversation needing no words. I enjoyed my version of truth, that her sparkly eye was due to her tears being close. Not tears of disappointment or in me, but the intensity of her love and seeing me. I loved the relationship Dad had with her. He never needed to speak about it for us to know how much he loved his sister-in-law, and I always believed this was mutual. A place of safety for Dad, who always suspected, feared that he would be misunderstood. Maybe it was the same for him, no words necessary, as her gentle presence with a little giggle and soft hands spoke of acceptance, appreciation and unconditional love. The prayer of St. Francis of Assisi, make me an instrument of your peace, a personal favourite of mine, as with many. I suspect this prayer was likely firmly bedded in Auntie Joy, as with my beautiful mum, as we have had the privilege of seeing the answering of that prayer in both of them. I'm pleased to say I see the channel bit in me, the peace bit I need to work on. I can't help see similarities of Mum and Auntie Joy as the unblood Russ family tree inclusions. It's interesting to me that Mum was the first of the 10 and Auntie Joy was the last. Very aware. No offence to Auntie Mary, Uncle Keith, Uncle Jim intended, so please hear that, LOL. I have the legacy from Dad of fear of being misunderstood as I share my private reflections. I shall stop to risk that further. I so love my Auntie Joy, I so valued being seen, I so valued not being measured nor compared. I always felt more than enough. Her passing feels wrong and far too soon from one that has the gift of a relationship with her from afar, that recalls a bright, precious, quick-witted, all-knowing little poppet that needed no words to speak her heart.
Thank you for those words, Nick. Okay, Christine McIntosh. She is the official supplier of shortbread for Joy over the years, and about 30 years of close friendship for us as a family. Welcome, team.
I think I'm a little bit like Scott said, and I came in at 7/8 of the pie of Joy's life. And I loved going and visiting her at Christmas time. I didn't take a shortbread all the way through the year. It was just at Christmas time, and I'd go and see her. And I knew all about the Hood kids and what they were up to, and she'd still tell me all the same stories all again, and that was great. But it was really nice to hear about Natalie and what was happening for her in Canada, but also David and Melanie for what was happening for you here. David, I have an affinity with Red Beach because my mother lives there. Now, my mother to Joy was young, and my mother's 92. So she said, oh, your mother's quite young, isn't she? So it's always a little bit of a competition with old folks when they get over an age, isn't it? Melanie, she used to love telling me about this amazing job that Melanie had with this very, very successful company, and how Melanie was so good at her job, and it was so lovely to hear. And you probably haven't heard of it, but it's called Pumpkin Patch, and they're very elite. So it was quite sweet that our kids were all dressed in pumpkin patch, and she was really proud that you were part of that. Yeah, and I think, Caleb, you were a model for them. I remember there were some photos taken one time. Yeah. I loved going to see Joy, and everything that's come through today is just what I feel. The twinkle in the eye is most definitely something. The compassion and the no judgment is really, really important. We have 3 children, and sometimes there's a saying 2 out of 3 ain't bad, and one of ours has been real bad for quite some time, but we love her immeasurably. And Joy was always so sweet about her, and she'd always ask me, and she'd say, how's Emily, how's she going? I pray for her, and I really appreciated that hugely. And there was no judgment, and she absolutely loved her grandchildren and her great-grandchildren.
and you are blessed to have had her, and we are blessed to have been able to share her, so thank you.
Thank you, team. Thank you.
We do finally come to the end, and I'd just really like to thank those of you that have come here to share with us this afternoon and share your memories of our mum, and all of those that are watching online, and particularly to the Canucks and the two in Melbourne. We know you would have loved to have been here, and all the other rallies around the country. So just to finish off this part before you get to sample.
Don't steal all my last piece.
Oh, are you finishing? Oh,
Yeah,
I thought I was finishing.
No, you were just introducing the hymn. Sorry.
Oh, okay. I better keep to the script. We're going. I thought this was it.
No.
We're going to finish with that song that those of you from Only Hunger Days will know very well. Every Sunday night, as a blessing, when we finished the service on a Sunday evening, God be in my head.
So that concludes the formal part of this celebration of Joy's wonderful 95 years. We've heard some very moving and funny tributes to this lady, and a true lady she was in all aspects of her life. Installed good values in her children, grandchildren and great-grandchildren, and was always looking to help out anyone in need or be a friend to any new person she met. On behalf of the family, I would like to thank all of those who have spoke or sung or contributed in any way to making this a joyous occasion for Joy. I hope all of you live streaming this have felt like you have been part of this celebration. However, unfortunately, you cannot join us for tea and coffee and the wonderful selection of all the treats that Joy used to bake, including the pikelets, the Afghans, the peanut brownies, the yo-yos, the chocolate fudge and the ginger crunch. So Beryl is also very appreciative of all the many texts and emails from cousins and friends that she has received. So thanks again for coming along and joining in on this end of an era occasion, and may God guide you all to walk in the same footsteps that Joy has taken. Carol and family will be available online to chat briefly, if that is possible. While we all have afternoon tea, and then the slideshow may be continuing after that. So farewell to Joy, and thanks again to all of you.
Thank you.
Well done, you guys. Nice to see you.
Good to see you too. I've got to fluff my cushions now.
Good work, Jim, and your ute.
Yeah.
Well done. Very cool. Tennille, hey Tennille. I don't know what you can see. Can you see us? Sorry. Yeah, with my hair.
Yeah.
Oh.
There you go. Hi, Brian.
You can chat with them.
Nice job on those slides, Nana. Thank you.
I knew you'd have a few photos. Where are you? Where are the boys? Nats, where are your boys? There you are. What's Jim holding up? You got your own snacks?
I was doing good Afghan.
Virtual Afghan. Virtual Afghan. I see your Afghan and raise you a ginger crunch. Go check, can you hear Tim? Harold, you should see in chat.
Hey, how are you? Very beautiful service and tribute. Definitely. Quite hard chatting on Zoom, eh? Have you got any audio in it? Oh, is that better? Oh. Yeah, nice. What do you got planned for the rest of the weekend? Oh, really? Oh, nice. Nice. Oh, very good. I love the singing. It was amazing. Crikey. It was very professional. Yeah, it was amazing, mate. Not as cool as your videos that you put online, though. The one that you had ages ago with the tractor, that ride-on lawnmower that you guys did. Yeah, those are awesome. I thought that might feature. Anyway, nice to see you guys. Happy New Year. I will leave the mic to someone else. See you, Boo. See you, Kareen. Enjoy your soft couch.